All right, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like good old Vars is back at it again with some more critique-based Genshin content. The topic is about new elements in the game, or potentially even a rework of the elemental system. I'm gonna be real when I talk about my opinion on elements in Genshin Impact. I feel like the design of elements, how certain elements pair way better with each other than others, and how certain characters are simply not able to work because of how like ICDs, reactions, all of that stuff is baked into the system. I feel like it's put the devs into a pigeonhole when it comes to their character design, when it comes to their kit design, and it has limited the Hoyoverse's creativity to such a high degree that every new release ends up feeling super stale and there isn't a lot of variety in combat. I'm personally in the boat that elements need a wide sweeping addition, some sort of new twist like imaginary, like in Honkai Star Rail, or Quantum, also in Honkai Star Rail and Honkai Impact, and the game is clearly linked to those, right? Having something like that to just spice up the gameplay, add more variation to team comps, and honestly, loosen some of the limitations that have just built up over time. A lot of people talk about how Wuwa wants more depth in the elemental system. I think that that would actually be a bad thing for the game. You wouldn't be able to have dual DPS, triple DPS compositions if elemental reactions were baked into the meta like it is in Genshin. And so I would love to see something that just loosens the requirements, gives more variability in team comps, and just allows for more freedom of choice in how players are using their roster. And so maybe that's the same opinion that Vars has as well. I'm excited to see what it's all about. So with that, let's get right on into it.
When the Pokemon franchise made a push into the 3D space for the first official time, Pokemon X and Y introduced a new typing to the game, Fairy type. This would mark the first instance the series has had a new typing in 13 years across 4 generations, with the last time being Generation 2 introducing Steel and Dark type. The Pokemon community at the time was both excited yet mildly concerned at the thought of a brand new type being added to the game, but all in all, I think the inclusion of Fairy made things a lot more enriching for Pokemon thereafter, considering it provided a measurable buff to older Pokemon like Clefable, Gardevoir, Togekiss, and Azumarill, along with the type itself being a veritable counter against the all-powerful Dragon type at the time.
You could view the new addition of an element, especially in a game that's a lot more competitive like Pokemon, as like power creep, but really, this is just the devs rebalancing their game. This is the devs recognizing that they've been put into, like I mentioned with Hoyoverse right at the intro, a design box where with the current limitations of their elemental system, the Nintendo devs, with the current limitations of their elemental system, they weren't able to fully bring out all of the potential in their combat. The dragon element, or the dragon type, was just way too broken, and they needed some sort of countermeasure to make sure that the game stayed playable or became more enjoyable in the long run. And that's something that I believe Genshin Impact sorely needs right now.
Introducing new things to the game can be small in nature but have a knock-on effect across all of its systems that were established before that point. Adding a new weapon type, new class, what have you, has always been viewed as the major turning point for any game.
I'm surprised he didn't put Dendro on here. He's probably going to be talking about Dendro a lot though.
Genshin Impact has its own empirical data to lend credence to it, the inclusion of Dendro, serving to not only introduce a new set of characters for us to collect, but also retroactively buffing a number of characters by nature, no pun intended, of the new elemental reactions that accompanied it. Suffice to say, much of version 3's hype was the result of us getting a new element. Without it, I don't think Sumeru would have been as exciting as it was.
You wanna know the best thing about Sumeru? They introduced this new element called Dendro, which is like all about plants and growing, and then 90% of the not 90, 70% of the region is a fucking desert where there's no plants.
Brings me to our topic for today. Over the past couple months, I made videos talking about things that can be done to recover the player base's declining goodwill towards the game.
In short, bro's been talking some mad shit about how fucked up the game is and why everyone's quitting it. And he's just continuing the trend.
Potentially forgotten areas like Mondstadt to introducing new upgraded forms to characters like Ningguang and Kaya to improving and expanding on the game's overall experience in all aspects.
And I'm gonna be honest, Vars, I feel like there's a lot of great points in all of these videos, but they're kind of going into a fucking abyss. They're going into a void. I look at all of these issues that have been brought up, and I'm 99% sure none of them have been addressed in any meaningful way at all. And maybe it's just like not high on the priority list for Hoyoverse because they probably can't find out a way to add exploration quality of life to any of these characters that you're seeing up here.
2 areas that I think might be helpful to that are 1. a drastic overhaul of the artifact system, which I plan to talk about in a separate video,
Ooh.
and 2, positing the idea of maybe introducing another element. Does Genshin Impact need more elements, or can adding more elements be beneficial for the game? We'll discuss that for today. One of the main ways gacha games, or any game regardless of genre, maintains excitement and keeps things fresh is by implementing new universal systems over time. The most popular games of all time do this in some shape or form. Minecraft adds a new material type, new biomes, overhauls the systems, and whatnot, creating a far more extensive and expanded game now than what we had back in 2011, for better or worse. It's honestly less of a decision and more of an obligation. Games have to expand and add new things. Everything has to expand and add new things. If you don't constantly innovate, you'll eventually lose customers to products that do innovate.
I like how, when he's talking about how how game companies and game devs are gonna lose customers, he doesn't even mention Wuthering Waves, but that is the only B-roll he has for that section. That is the power of B-roll, ladies and gentlemen. Bro just delivered a critical fucking blow. Bro delivered a critical fucking blow with that B-roll. Excellent job.
Too cavalier with how they expand and innovate, leading to power and feature creep, which is something that Genshin has been adamantly against over the years. But it's become clear that their refusal to evolve past the mechanics already present in the game is what makes the essential experience feel so formulaic and uneventful, despite them releasing new characters, new regions, and hosting new events over time. Expanding on new systems is a major way to overhaul the game and make players have to reevaluate what they know about it. Done correctly, it can broaden the scope of the game in a way that's constructive and engaging. When Genshin brought Dendro into play, it was a shiny new gimmick that created tons of discussion over how strong it could be in the metagame, what characters got buffed from it, and what types of characters we'd have. Dendro reactions were so powerful at a base level it gave rise to a number of free-to-play friendly teams. A Hyperbloom team of 4-star units was able to overpower most version 1 DPS characters at the time.
A lot of people view Dendro as a bit of power creep, but I will be entirely honest in terms of like how they balanced it. They didn't give Dendro like the most absurdly high damage ceiling in the game. They made it comparable to somebody's turbo invested, like super well invested, like hyper carry team comp, like with their Hu Tao or like their national teams. It kind of raised the floor, but it didn't raise the ceiling too much. But it made top tier performance available to way lower investment. And so what that meant was that the overall power level of everybody's account increased, but it didn't make like the highest tier players that much stronger. And so you could view what Dendro did to the game as good. You could also view it as bad as well, though, because it kind of got people to a point, right, where they're all able to start clearing the abyss a lot more frequently. But then it sort of became a running meme in the community that who fucking cares, just use Hyperbloom. Kind of like how in HSR it was who cares, just use Super Break. Is this my favorite Genshin Impact YouTuber? Yes, sir. He's here.
And I would say version 3 was around the time team building went into high gear, building off version 2's foundation. It was great for equalizing the metagame at the time as well.
True.
Nowadays, with the exception of Cryo, I'd argue all elements are in more or less a decent position. Part of what elevated Electro as much as it did was Dendro. If not for Dendro, many Electro units would be far less effective than they are now.
Let's be real here. You take Raiden out of this, and these three characters were low-key some of the most useless in the game before Dendro was released. These three characters, your Fischl, your Yai Miko, and your Kuki Shinobu, if you look at the state of how good they were in, like, the meta at the end of 2.0, like the end of the Inazuma region, they were just actually dog shit. Yai Miko was considered, like, she was a Coomer pull, right, for a lot of people. She was considered one of the worst limited 5-stars in the game. And then Keqing, you were just like, holy shit, what are we even doing with this? And then you have Dendro come in and basically save these, right? A good example of reverse power creep, because they definitely released at a power level that was significantly below a lot of other members of the roster. A lot. Which is ironic considering Inazuma was the region of
far less
Electro.
Effective than they are now, although Chevreuse and Chaska do help out a bit in terms of non-Dendro Electro usage.
True.
Like I said, an instrumental part of version 3's success was, among other things, the hype surrounding a brand new element added to the game. For 2 years before that, we've been settled into the 6 playable ones: Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, Animo, Electro, and Geo, and the meta that was built around them.
What Geo meta? Who even... The meta for Geo is pairing a Geo character with any other element. Because the newest Geo characters are intentionally designed to just, like, be used with other elements. Like, think about Navia and Xilonen. And I guess nobody cares about Chiori. She's basically not even a character. It's just like they have to be used with other characters of other elements for them to do anything. They're basically just like Animo at that point.
When Dendro came out, all attention was focused on it. It was the first time Traveler was actually decent for once, as Electro Geo and Animo Traveler were all disappointing in the end. Additionally, having two extremely powerful Dendro 5-stars, a sub-DPS and main DPS, only added to the interest. Dendro would prove to become one of the most consistently strong categories too, with Kaveh being the only underwhelming one. Since then, I feel like the game hasn't really changed a whole lot from a fundamental perspective. Version 4 introduced a ton of unique playstyles and pushed the needle on what a character was capable of, trying out new strategies like Mono Pyro through Linny, HP manipulation through Farina, Neuvillette, and Risley, Geo finally getting some love through Navia and Chiori.
Doesn't count. This Taylor doesn't. She's just one of the most pointless characters that has ever released in the game. I think in her baseline kit, she requires another Geo character for her skill to even work. Like, she needs another construct on the team, and her C1 removes that restriction. But the rest of her kit doesn't even synergize with constructs even being used. And so she just has like this asterisk on her fucking kit that requires another Geo character, but then there's no synergy for having that Geo character other than getting a restriction removed. Chiori was a signal of the downfall of Genshin Impact. Genshin went downhill after this character released. 1,000,000%. The game started going downhill right after she was released. I think it was version 4.5.
The Overload reaction getting uplifted by Chevris, and Demily building off the once forgotten Burning reaction.
Dude, who pulled this character? Dude, this character looks so bad. It's unbelievable. She looks so bad. It's unbelievable. Who actually cares about this unit?
Forgotten Burning reaction. But by and large, we're still operating within the same constraints that Genshin has had since 2022. Version 5 tried to shake things up with the Night Soul system being more gameplay contingent than Arc Alignment was, but it's primarily contained to just the units that belong to Natlan.
Let's just do a quick comparison. This is what all the Natlan units look like in like their portraits. Compare that to the Fontaine designs are just so much cleaner. The Fontaine designs just look so much cleaner. They look so much better. It looks like we're just trying to use colors for no reason here. It actually, like, Kanish looks like he looks so bad. There's too much fucking going on over here. I know somebody said Jalona, like, why is she even have cyan teal in her design? And then Chaska's just a fucking disaster. There's just way too many colors here, and it just seems like they're for no reason. Honestly, every other design prior just looks so much cleaner. I guess like causing a visual seizure in your player base is like a sign of the Night Soul mechanic. I don't know. It's like the entire design of Natlan's roster was a complete miss. It added absolutely nothing unique to the game other than, okay, you can only use these Natlan characters with other Natlan characters. Otherwise, you're missing half of their fucking kit. Maybe not half, but a significant amount of their power level is tied to having a Natlan character in their team. And it's just like, at that point, you're just like, all right, what are we doing here? Is there really no other way? Like, we couldn't just make more characters that would buff older members of the roster like Farina? I genuinely believe that Farina and kind of like a lot of Fontaine as a whole was so healthy for the game in that it made so many older members of the roster feel usable. It like filled in a lot of the gaps that were existing in power levels. And like Natlan just goes ahead and just feels like it does the complete fucking opposite, where no non-Natlan characters feel like they got a power increase. You feel super pressured to pull for all the new stuff and just ignore all the old stuff that you had before. Like, you're actively incentivized to just not use non-Natlan characters in Natlan because you know that the exploration is going to be bad and you're going to have to use Saurians unless you just pull and slot in, level up, and use the Natlan characters. And it's just like a complete 180 from what they were doing in Fontaine.
Dendro was more all-encompassing. They tried to implement custom mechanics into characters like Chaska's Elemental Roulette, but those are character exclusive. If you don't pull the character, you don't get to experience the new stuff. Version 4 and 5 collectively saw a major boost in power scaling.
Kind of like how Jalona makes Geo actually feel good, but only if you pull her. Oh, yep.
Collectively saw a major boost in power scaling for Genshin. A lot of that has to do with the game reaching a point where the only way for its new characters to stand out is to simply do more than what we have before. There was no possible way Mavuika could have gone about being a main attacker differently than simply just being stronger than the other main DPS units. It's true they still have a lot more to cover as far as addressing mechanics or ability combinations that have not been seen yet, but after operating within the constraints we've had for the past almost 2 years.
Yeah, how about a replacement for Zhangling? Have they done that yet? Have they actually made a meaningful replacement for Zhangling? Because I feel like Mavuika kind of does like 50-25% of the job, but it's been 5 years. The Nation of War, the Pyro Nation, and they still just will not release a 5-star version of Zhangling.
Begs the question if a new element or even new weapon type would be helpful for the game. We're at the second to last version of Tevat, and I believe they confirmed the game's story and whatnot will continue past the final regions Neshnaya. But players, at least in the West, are losing interest in the game at a rapid pace. I don't think we can wait until late 2026 for them to introduce a new element. By then, it might already be too late.
True.
I just can't afford to think such long-term considering the industry itself is all about short-term instant gratification and whatnot.
I am 99.9% sure the player base would have received a new element and like new interactions, new reactions way better than this stupid godforsaken Night Soul mechanic. In what universe is a player going to like a mechanic that you can only activate and like use? They design artifacts around it, and the mechanic is it's basically just racism. Night Soul is basically, it's just racism coded as a combat mechanic into the game. Like, what's the point? Like, if you don't play with other people of your kind, you lose power. That is just what Night Soul is. And it's just so strange that this is something that they decided to put in instead of something that actually adds more excitement. It's like, oh, okay, here we go. Let's just reduce the possibilities in team composition. Let's just make everybody weaker unless you do this exact thing that's going to make us the most money. Yeah, okay, all right. Charlotte had racist mechanics, but it was different version of buffs. Yeah, so Charlotte did more damage if she was with non-Fontaine units, and Charlotte did more healing if she was with Fontaine units. And Fontaine units were the only ones that really wanted her additional healing. And so, if anything, her, like, unique design was, like, more so tailored around giving her more uses. It's not like Night Soul, where it's just like, okay, you're not Natlanese, actually go fuck yourself.
Cat with Blue Hat actually made a video way back on how Genshin might potentially have more elements, such as a light and dark element.
3 years ago, yeah, that's a while ago,
like
buddy.
Time and space, perhaps a void element. There have been theories on Honkai Star's quantum and imaginary elements possibly also being added to Genshin. Then we have Dane's Leaf, who appears to make use of abyssal properties to attack instead of your conventional 7. That's been practically unofficially confirmed by Hoyo at this point to be a potential new playable element. These are
Dark
all theories,
blue.
mind you, but the point is, something to fundamentally change the game would be necessary in not just handling the monotonous gameplay experience we've had for years, but establishing true change for the game, an inflection point that distinguishes the Genshin we knew before from the Genshin we know now. It's hard to tell exactly how that would play out though, because for the most part, elemental reactions have been conceptualized around real-life applications. For instance, water conducting electricity is what makes electrocharge behave the way that it does, or fire and ice causing a melt reaction, Animal Swirl using wind to throw around fire, electricity, water, and ice everywhere. Despite the fantasy world of Genshin, they try to make the elements adhere to a specific real-life occurrence. Naturally, it can make theorizing a possible reaction between fire and light, or nature and dark, a bit more nebulous and hard to grasp.
I think in a similar sense, you could use the same exact logic to talk about the current implementation and why it doesn't make sense. Because I 1000% believe that ground, which is Geo, and plants, which is Dendro, would do something. I would just assume that when ground meets plant, like something grows, right? Like you would assume that there'd be a, like if these were the actual rules that were being followed, there would be a Dendro and Geo reaction, or that there might be a Dendro and Cryo reaction, but there's not. So I think that it goes both ways. I think that kind of like this idea that they have to stick to like real life and how real life works in a game that has flying motorcycles, maybe, you know, maybe that's not something they need to do.
But that can pose a new opportunity in and of itself. Instead of releasing just one element, I'd argue there might be merit to releasing multiple. Further,
True.
creating an entirely new elemental reaction table. The 7 elements of Genshin have already covered Earth's elements quite extensively. The only things I could potentially see them adding are new reactions for each element. After all, we still don't have a full 7x7 web. For instance, Cryo reacting with Dendro or Animal reacting with Geo. there's still room for that to go around. Instead, what they can try to accomplish with the more dimensional elements like time and space is to use it to manipulate the battlefield to indirectly facilitate other reactions. For instance, using time to put a target into a frozen state with an elemental application on them, then doing like a chain attack on it before unfreezing them to apply all of those elements at once. Alternatively, they could tap into some more fantastical interactions like combining light with cryo, using ice to reflect light for more AoE damage, perhaps combining darkness with pyro for a dark fire attack. On that front, maybe the new elements could have supplementary components to them that enhance or alter the properties of the reactions we have, adding time to a vaporized reaction or space to a quickened reaction. Maybe adding light to a swirl reaction or dark to a crystallized reaction could do stuff like make the reaction last longer, apply debuffs, deal splash damage, or something to that effect. Personally, I think a separate elemental reaction table would allow for more interactions to take place, mostly because dimensional aspects like time, space, light, and darkness are already thematically linked to each other.
It's just the idea of time, space, light, and darkness, you know, the imaginary and quantum that we're seeing over here. These are just such loose concepts that are so easy to weave into like a fantasy sense. Like one of like the biggest tropes that exists in like just fantasy as a whole is somebody conjuring up a fucking blade of light and then slicing through stuff. Or somebody conjuring up like a blade of fucking darkness and then slicing through stuff. It's not too outside of like the realm of imagination for any of these elements to interact with each other. Like there's just some sort of like corruption mechanic that like makes things darker or makes them take extra damage like from repeatedly hitting this interaction, or like repeatedly hitting something after it's interacted with shadow. There's just so much stuff for the devs to explore and, you know, allow them to add more depth to the game. But the thing is that I feel like the devs have waited too long. They've waited too long to experiment with more elements, because all they've done, right, in this time span since Sumeru is just add more and more and more of these characters and essentially more interdependencies in the roster. Because if they do decide they want to add in imaginary, they want to add in quantum, and then make those interact with every other element, now instead of working with 2.0's roster, like Dendro did, they have to work with 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and then 5.0's roster as well. They have 3 times as many characters that they need to worry about. And that also means, right, that they have to make sure that these reactions are balanced around their kits. And it's become a huge mess. And if they had decided simply to start adding these things in sooner instead of waiting until the roster is over 100 characters, then the job would have been a lot easier, and then all of their future character designs could have been tailored around the new restrictions or the new capabilities that these new potential elements would provide. But that's all part of sort of like the design, the character design black hole that I do feel like Genshin has sort of slipped into, because it is getting a little bit stale, right? Genshin combat has essentially devolved into, okay, I've got a main damage dealer who needs to use reactions to deal any damage. And so I'm going to have the character that applies the reactions from off field, and then I'll go on the main DPS and then pop all those reactions. And that's just kind of what the game has become. Like, that is just like the game now. Off-field applier, main field DPSer, every single team. Literally every team.
It might even allow for a new type of endgame content, or perhaps an overhaul to Spiral Abyss, where one side can mandate terrestrial elements, while the other side needs dimensional elements. The benefit of this is that, as mentioned before, it would create a totally brand new experience for Genshin, the likes of which have never been seen before, giving Hoyo plenty of room to release new characters, expand on new mechanics, new combat systems, and release new endgame content that can further encourage players to test out different characters.
I think that if Hoyo has more content where the characters are sort of like given out for free, especially with the newer elements, and you don't have to pull them to use it, I think it's an okay idea. But if we do end up with more situations like the realm of like tempered forging or whatever the fuck it is, where if you don't have Mavuika or Solali, you basically, or Mavuika and Solali, my bad, you need both of them, then you're not going to be able to get the full rewards. I do think that's going to be a bad design. And I feel like that's something that, especially with the recent trajectory and the track record of Genshin so far in 2025, that's something that I would legitimately fear with the introduction of a new element. My mindset is that based off the current dev team, or at least the current leadership at Hoyo, if Dendro was released right now, or if Dendro was released in Natlan and that was kind of like the new edition, they would have made it way more predatory. They would have 9,000% have made Dendro MC way more dog shit. And they would have probably released like these really strong Dendro characters a lot sooner. And then it's kind of just mandated across all the content that you have Dendro on the team. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to clear it. And I do feel like that's something that they would have done in the present state because they're doing it with the Natline characters.
Even though version 5 units are stronger than ever, they're being skipped a lot by players because they're ultimately non-essential. But if they were to release 2 new elements at once, light and dark for example, then suddenly, even if the feature light or dark 5 stars are comparatively not as strong as Mavuika in attacking or Farina in supporting, simply for the sheer fact that they're new makes them more appealing and sought after.
People are just looking for different ways to play the game. People at this point are 1,000,000% just looking for different ways to play the game. And doing some dumb shit like Night Soul mechanics that are just like the only way for you to play the game differently is to start pulling all of the new characters, and then you're only going to be able to use like this Power Ranger team up just with each other was not the right way to go about it. And it's something that players don't want to do because they don't want to feel like their character that they just pulled is incomplete until they pull the other 2, 3, 4, 5 stars that work with them that are also all in subsequent patches. And so if you're free to play, you can't even get them. And if you're a low spender, you can't even get them all. You have to literally be pay to win to even complete this team.
Spend a year or two building on the elements more, therefore not making more units for the current 7 and having to gratuitously inflate their power to drive sales. They would have to make a light and dark healer, light and dark support, light and dark sub DPS, light and dark main DPS.
Just start giving out more of these characters for free when the new element releases and actually make the free ones pretty good.
At the rate at which Genshin makes new characters, that could keep us occupied for an entire version. More when you consider they have a habit of making units
and not like
the
the Traveler level free, like actually good free.
Inazuma for Kirara and Liyue for Yaoyao and Baichu. New systems being put in place require more strategy and team building, making things more interesting for players who focus on that side of the game. On the other hand, those who play more casually and just to mess around will appreciate the new mechanics in their own way. It's fresh and new for all types of players, not just us ones. Ultimately, this does mean they would have to add new endgame content, which is kind of what players have been begging Hoyo to do for the past god knows how long.
Just don't make it the Imaginarium Theater. The one thing I fear is that they add the new element and then they just turn the end game into some dumb shit like the Imaginarium Theater, where it's just like, oh my god, it becomes like it's literally a chore based off of your roster.
One other benefit to doing this, especially early, is that it lays the groundwork for when those elements eventually become relevant in the story, making it feel like less of an ass pull. What caused Natlan to feel so out of place is how everything came out of nowhere. If they were to foreshadow more sophisticated technology being in the game ahead of time, like say electronic music being seen in Fontaine or Sumeru, then perhaps Shulona's DJ equipment would have had more grounds to be legitimate and not just the thing they shoehorned in there. They exercised that with Dendro. The player base was aware of it being in the game from day one with the burning reaction, Dendro slimes, Baichu having a Dendro vision, and so on.
Actually true, yeah, it was foreshadowed.
It made perfect sense for there to be Dendro characters outside of Sumeru, we just haven't met them yet. Adding new elements now could make them feel like they were more involved in the game compared to if they were completely absent for the entire time. Let's put this another way, if Hoyo plans to eventually go past the VAT and bring us new playable elements, there is no possible way those new elements can be retroactively implemented in previous regions without it feeling like a complete retcon. Whatever element Dainsleif is, they obviously plan to keep it only for characters associated with Khaenri'ah, but if they were to create say a light element character first seen in Celestia, they can't release a light character that came from Mostan or Fontaine since the lore forbids it. So if they want to make it so light or dark element characters walk around to VAT, maybe introducing them ahead of time as a precursor would help them feel more integrated.
I mean, it could also be that somebody just gets the power too, right? I don't think people would be too remiss to the idea, especially given the fact that A, people just randomly generate these fucking visions in the first place to even receive their elemental power. If there was like, I guess, a type of character that just randomly receives the power of Spectro, randomly receives the power of light, of imaginary, and then the other person receives the random power of fucking quantum or darkness. They've already opened the door to just literal random shit happening on a whim. I don't feel like the writers are like this talentless where they can't find a way to weave it into the story. The concept of gaining a vision in the first place is already kind of loose. My determination built up in my mind, and then this thing appeared in front of me. Like, that's kind of what it is. if it's already that fast and loose to receive a vision and elemental power in the first place, I don't think you're really pushing the envelope if you just introduce a new one. The basis was already weak heading into this.
Them feel more integrated. All that said, there's an obvious downside to adding new elements, namely in that you can interpret having to pull for new characters in a good or bad way depending on who you ask. Optimistically, you might see it as an opportunity to play into something fresh, whereas cynically, you might see it as Hoyo trying to force you to pull for new characters out of necessity.
You wanna know what I think is the #1 way for Hoyoverse to regain the goodwill of the player base in Genshin Impact, which they have eroded tremendously across version 5.0. My take on what would get Genshin players like reinvigorated back into the game would be A, the release of a new element that actually spices up gameplay and makes things feel a lot more exciting. B, a new free character who's actually like at least like very top tier and you get great performance with them in the new element. And then the next 5-star character of the new element that releases is like only 10% better than the free one that they gave. That to me would basically be a sign that A, Hoyo is like stepping down on the power creep. They're stepping down on the predatory practices, and they're also willing to quote unquote take a loss in that they're not going to make their limited character so obscenely broken and just so much better than the free version that they gave. And so players will actually feel like they're being respected in terms of the new additions being added, because there is no point at all in releasing a new element, making the free character for that element dog shit, and then proceeding to release a new limited character that just absolutely blows the free one out of the water. Because then that is just going to continue the trend of why people are getting tired with the game, because they feel like Hoyo is getting greedier and greedier every patch.
There being no alternative options available. Their sister title Star Rail is particularly guilty of this. HSR has a bad habit of releasing characters conveniently geared towards a certain scenario, and if you miss that character, you're out of luck for that.
Why is this so based? Wait, when did Vars get so based?
Geared towards a certain scenario, and if you miss that character, you're out of luck for that content.
He's basically saying, if you don't pull the Herta, go fuck yourself. If you don't pull Algae or the Herta, just go fuck yourself. Hey, yo, that's based. That is based. That's actually tremendously, absurdly, ridiculously based. When did Vars get so based? Has Vars always been this base and like that one Woo-Wah vid was just the exception? Like, he's just spinning. He's just been spinning the entire time.
With that game in particular being predicated on playstyle compositions, certain characters might feel extremely underwhelming unless you also happen to have these other characters. So obviously, Hoyo would have to navigate brand new elements in a more delicate fashion, chiefly if they plan to go the route of an entirely separate reaction table. If they were to integrate the hypothetical 8th, 9th, 10th element into the game more holistically, then you need only worry about getting just 1 or 2 characters, as opposed to half a dozen to complete a party of a different reaction. But all the more reason why I feel like it's worthwhile for them to contemplate doing stuff like this sooner rather than later. Skirk is expected to come out soon, but something tells me she's gonna be one of the 7 elements. I certainly hope not. I hope she's something new given she comes from an entirely different world, but considering Hoyo hasn't done anything to foreshadow...
I feel like Techie was actually right when he said that there's something wrong with Skirk's design. She actually does look a little weird. Now that I'm looking at her, she does look a little bit weird. It feels like she should be taller. Like, it feels like she got like transformed in Photoshop in like the wrong way. It actually does look like she got like distorted slightly. Needs full, I don't even know if it's the full pants thing. It's like her arms don't look like right. It's just whatever. There's something like going on over here. There's something like going on over here that just looks strange. Yeah, and hopefully she is that abyssal element that we've been talking about, right? And then we actually start seeing some transformation.
Done anything to foreshadow there being other playable elements, the odds of her being anything new.
I mean, she summons a black fucking hole and sucks the it sucks the big ass whale inside of it, right? That's like the whole time distortion, space manipulation that we were just covered in the video before. And if she does none of that, yeah. Remember what I said about the Genshin devs being sort of put into a design black hole? Yeah. If she ends up being Cryo, the game might actually be cooked. If she is Cryo, despite the fact that she summons a purple black hole and then sucks gigantic whales inside of it, yeah, there's something going on. Yeah, something's going wrong.
are extremely low. I don't really think there's any significant negative besides that. You can argue feature creep, but right now the issue with Genshin is how featureless every update
Bro got fucking sent into Minecraft. I can't believe bro actually got fucking turned into a cubicle.
feels. Once again, exploration fans are the exception. They've been getting new feature after new feature. But combat and progression fans like myself who have been begging for more in-game content or more things to work towards haven't really gotten anything new for
Bro
years
got
now.
bricked.
So I might just be biased on that front. I'm almost certain Hoyo plans to add new elements to Genshin, especially if we ever do leave Teyvat for new worlds. But my concern is that long before they get to that, the game's popularity will die out to a point where it's like No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk or other games that get it together, but people gave up on them ages ago. Adding new elements and devising new systems can be a step to showing the public that Genshin's about to change in a big way. Not just smoke and mirrors, but fundamental, foundational change. What do you guys think about new elements? Do you believe the game can get by on the 7 we have now?
Absolutely not. The game has gotten so absurdly stale in elements like the combat that there's no need in the present to pull on any limited banner if you've been playing for at least a year and a half or maybe 2 years. The elements have gotten so stale that people are starting to describe the new releases as like Arlecchino is big Hu Tao. Chlorind is just big Kaching. Because all the new characters, right, they just end up being a DPS or a sub DPS, and then it just feels like the same exact thing, but like slightly different, or it deals a little bit more damage, or it uses a different weapon type, or deals damage in a different way. But honestly, yeah, they're not even using different weapon types. Fucking Arlecchino and Hu Tao both use polearms. Chlorind and Kaching both use swords. Yeah, they can't even have any variety in that sense when it comes to the new characters. It's gotten to a point where the only way these devs are like finding out how to sell things is to add in all of these just like restrictive or predatory mechanics, exactly like Night Soul. And if that's where the game is going to go down, I'd rather they just add new elements, new dynamics to combat than add dumb shit like Night Soul or Arca as the only way for the value proposition of a new banner to be spiced up. Oh yeah, we're gonna have the boss in the abyss where it requires Night Soul to fight it, otherwise it's gonna be a complete pain in the dick to fight. Oh, you better pull on these banners, buddy. And if that is the best that these devs are going to be able to do, the game will 1000% be cooked in the long run, because people are already getting fucking pissed off by how the Night Soul mechanic works. And the fact that they're even designing artifacts, like, think about it this way. What was a new mechanic that was released in Fontaine that nobody even thinks about anymore? I'll tell you. Bond of Life. What the fuck even happened to that? They put it on like 2 characters on an artifact set, and they were like, okay, get the fuck out of here, buddy. That's what Bond of Life was. It's like, is it ever going to be revisited again? What do you think is going to happen to Night Soul once Natlan is over? Right? Do you think they're going to release more Night Soul characters when they see how badly the region got received? No, they're going to move on to fucking Nod Kai, Cobra Kai, Natlan, or Snezhnaya, and then introduce some more bullshit, unless it's a new element, and introduce more bullshit, and then Night Soul is just going to be the new Bond of Life. A little bit of support, and then just go fuck yourself for the rest of the game's existence. And that is such an unhealthy way to design the roster, where it just becomes like flavor of the month mechanic instead of just an overarching addition to the system like an element would be. And one is a lot better than the other for the game's longevity.
Or do you agree that new stuff could be just what we need to turn things around? Let me know in the comments down below.
I'm not gonna lie, this was a banger vid that I think broke down the argument very well. There is so much design space in Genshin Impact that hasn't been explored and would make the game feel so much more replayable, so much more exciting, and add so much more depth to it. And the problem is that they just keep doing the same exact thing over and over. Every new character release is just another one with a slight twist. And it's gotten so boring. You even have creators like Bran Online saying that they don't want to even spend a lot of money in the game anymore because they were talking about how the combat and the kits has just gotten boring. You have the biggest Hoyo shows in the space just saying that it's boring. And so, I feel like the Genshin devs need to make they're at a crossroads right now. Do we just say fuck all the veteran invested players and just keep only going for the new ones like they are right now with this whole flavor of the month mechanic? Or do they flesh out the existing game systems, add some overarching stuff that benefits everybody, and grow the game in the long term? One takes more effort than the other. The new elemental system would take a lot more effort. And so I think Hoyo's just kind of going for the low-hanging fruit at the moment. And that is kind of just what Night Soul is. And it's really unfortunate to see. I hope they do make a shift. And I'm glad there are content creators like Vars out there, you know, really calling this sort of stuff out. So hopefully it can get some sort of actionable change. But with that, let me know what you all think. Peace.